All right, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Chevrolet's history at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway runs deep with our founder, Louis Chevrolet's statue in front of the Speedway Museum. And by the way, it's Chevrolet's 100th anniversary in August as well, by our founder, Louis Chevrolet. The Chevrolet and the Central Indiana Chevrolet dealers are proud to be part of Chevy's official vehicle relationship with the Speedway as it's continued on. Chevrolet and the local Chevy dealers are honored to have the first four-time winner, A.J. Foyt, drive the 2011 Camaro pace car. Mr. Foyt's deep racing history at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway makes Mr. Foyt a great pace car driver for us and the Speedway. Thank you, Mr. Foyt, for allowing Chevrolet to be part of your 50th year here at the Indy 500 race.
Now, Jim, that's fine, but you make me sound awful old, which I am. But it's a great honor. It's a great honor to drive the pace car. 50 years ago, I didn't think I'd still be here, so I guess I'm glad to be here and glad to drive the Chevrolet. And I do have a couple of them in my showroom, so maybe the crew's got to win this one so I can put another one in there. So be proud to win it and proud to be with General Motors and Chevrolet division.
Jeff Belskus, the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Mr. Belskus, one of the things that I think about in this announcement, the long-standing relationship that we have with Chevrolet at the Speedway, and also the long-standing relationship with A.J. Foyt that goes far, far deeper than just a race driver who's had success here. This is something that goes much deeper than that.
Well, absolutely. As you heard Sam say, Chevrolet goes back 100 years, and they're celebrating their 100-year anniversary. And we're very appreciative to Chevrolet and giving us these beautiful pace cars, these Camaro SS's. And, of course, with A.J., I mean, who could, the greatest race car driver in the history of the Indianapolis 500 and maybe in the history of the world. And so we're very fortunate to have him and glad that he was willing to drive this year.
A.J., I can't help but note that in the very first yearbook of the United States Auto Club in 1956, in the Midwest Midget Points, the very last entry is a guy from Houston, Texas named A.J. Foyt, who came and ran the night before the 500 right across the street. Amazing story, really, coming here out of Playland Park in Houston. And what puts a great bookend in this, you won the 50th anniversary race, your first 500 here. You seem to really enjoy the opportunity to do this.
Well, talking about coming here, Don Freeland, which is deceased, and Jimmy Reese, I used to, when they come down at Playland Park, I used to wash them. They just change the tires. And I was fortunate enough, I had my own car. I didn't know too much, but I had my car over here at 16th Street, and I made the race, so I had the nose, and I was changing some weight. And I'll never forget what Jimmy Reese told me. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm jacking a little weight." He says, "Well, first of all, let me tell you something. Where you need to jack a little weight's on the right side, right ahead of the steering gear." I said, "Man, what are you talking about?" He's talking about that throttle foot. He said, "That's where you need jack weight." I'll never forget that long as I live. And I'll never forget it. But coming back here, my dream was when I was in high school, I listened to the 500, hoping someday just to come back to see it. And then when I did see it, hoping someday I'd be fortunate enough, to be able to try to race in a car, much less win the race, In the way I look at this race, I've been fortunate enough through the years to win a few races all over. And I've always felt like this. I'm glad to be named amongst a bunch of the great, great race drivers. I don't feel them no better than any other ones at their time, because I look back at history, back at this place, you couldn't hog tie me in some of them cars they run over 100 miles an hour in. But I did run long enough that we did run over 225 here. And just see the changes from 1961 till I quit is unbelievable. And like I've always said, a lot of people feel that they made the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I've always felt the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is what's made A.J. Foyt. And I appreciate what Jeff said about me, but I'm glad to be named amongst some of the great race drivers.
Seems to make sense. On the 100th anniversary, you ought to lead the first lap. Questions for these gentlemen, particularly Mr. Belskus and A.J.
A.J., when you're leading that first lap, are you going to be feeling you want to push down on the throttle?
Well, I said the day I stepped out of here, retired, that I would never sit back in another car. I'm just glad to be able to say, 50 years later, I'll let this race one more time. And I'm quite sure 50 years ago, if I'd had this car, it'd been a hell of a lot better ride than what I drove back then. Probably could have won the race and listened to the radio.
AJ, as a team owner, and you've been a team owner for a number of years, do you get the same thrill out of success, winning the 500 as a team owner, winning races and stuff like that? Do you still get the same thrill that you did as a driver?
You want to know the truth?
Yes, sir.
No. It's nothing like being in the driver's seat. Now it's so much technology. I can have a driver and tell him exactly what he's doing wrong, see what he's doing wrong. Back then, it was you and your mechanic. So it's a whole different ball game today. It's like everything. Everything's so much more on the computer, and you can see the mistakes and tell, just like one of my engineers told Vitor, which is a good driver, in California just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, if you back off a little bit, get in the corner a little easier, you pick up 1 or 2 tenths. Well, he went out and did that, and he picked up. Where before, it's just you and your mechanic. Mechanic would have to see you. So it's just so much technology ahead today than it was back then. But it's great because it's made the cars a lot safer and everything else. And that's the biggest thing in any sport is safety.
Questions?
AJ, you drove and won in both front and rear engine cars. Which was the tougher to drive?
Well, the front engine with the bricks and all that, to me, it was a lot worse car to drive because you had so much vibration. The motors were 180 degree, and I remember we used to put wood on the steering to take away some of the vibration come through the steering gear, and your hands would go to sleep. I can remember a lot of times when I was running the frame roaster, I'd take my hand off and just kind of slap it against it, get the feeling back. Because if you wasn't careful, your hands just go to sleep from vibration.
Mr. Gomes, for Chevrolet, what has racing and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in particular meant to Chevrolet on a day-to-day basis? Does it help you with sales? Does it help with the image of the company? What is it that attracts Chevrolet to racing, and back to Indianapolis for that matter?
Well, first of all, we got our roots here with Louis Chevrolet, and understand his brother won the race in 1911, so that's good. But then Chevrolet and racing, from our roots, our roots are with racing. Louis Chevrolet was a racer with speed. And you look at our core products of Corvettes, Camaros, from the sport car, and that's part of our heritage. So the racing population and the demographics all come back and support Chevrolet as one. So our dealers use this platform to merchandise and market to customers, as we do as well. And the demographics of racing really hits Chevrolet perfect in the sweet spot. So it does help us overall. And just not here at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but across the country with our affiliation with NASCAR and Indy Motorsports.
For AJ, when you do stop and pause or think about your days racing, do one of the victories percolate to the surface or the forefront any more than any of the others, and why?
Well, to be truthful with you, they were all so great that it's unbelievable. But I guess the one that probably meant as much as anything was 1961, where Eddie Sachs and I had such a great race all day long. We didn't have radios or nothing, and we raced hard all day. I'd be leading, he'd be leading, and all of a sudden they held up a signboard, late stop, fuel. I'm saying to myself, damn, you done put 75 gallons there. What do you mean I haven't used that much fuel again? And so when I had to make the stop, naturally my heart just quit beating, knowing I felt like I had to race one, then I lost it. And then in the meantime, where Sachs was such a hard race driver that he run so hard trying to keep up with me with a light loaded fuel that he just wore his tire completely out. And after the race, I seen it. I don't think he could have run 2 more laps without blowing it. So there's the day I felt like I had it won, then I lost it, and it come back. So that really meant great for myself. And it's just hard to put it in words how you feel. I think probably going down the back straight, I had a few tears. But all in all, you know, that was probably one of the greatest ones. And to be the first four-time winner, I mean, that meant an awful lot to me. Because, see, when I come here, I couldn't even get a pit pass, you know. It's not, I was walking around the garage area for about a week because I told him I was supposed to drive for Dean Van Lines, and I'll never forget, I think his name was Frankie Bain. I wish I could remember the Chevrolet guy I was talking about earlier. It always said, I said, I'm supposed to drive there. He said, well, when the car gets here, you come back. I said, oh, okay, whatever's right. So I was walking around the garage area and couldn't get in the garage area, so I'll never forget his name. And then when Clint Bronner got here, then they signed me into pits so I could go in the pits.
AJ, two of your wins came in coyote orange cars, and that coyote orange color is an eerie similarity to that Chevy engine block orange. Could you talk a little bit about the genesis of that and how all that came together?
Well, actually, when I had my Chevrolet dealerships, we used to order a bunch of the station wagons, and they used to come up here. I think it was called Vermilion Orange or something like that. I always call it Coyote Red because, we ordered a lot of our Chevrolets that color. My trucks and all of them I used to bring back here was painted at General Motors, and I think it's Vermilion Orange they called it at that time. But we're going to have one up here this year too, orange.
AJ, you were talking about your greatest races. What about the one where you came back after those horrible injuries up at Elkhart Lake, and I think started on the front row? And
Well,
what that
actually, you
meant to
know,
you?
probably the fans here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and especially your newspaper writers and TV people thought I couldn't come back. I think y'all drove me as much to prove a point that I could come back. And naturally, I wanted to come back or I wouldn't have. But, yeah, the fans probably brought me back longer than I should have come back. But I have no regrets. The day I stepped out here, I'll never forget when Mr. Hullman sent Ray Haroon and myself, I think it was What's My Line in New York. Hell, I never really been out of Houston, Texas. But we go up to New York, and they had What's My Line. I'll never forget asking him, I said, when is it time that you really want to quit racing? And he says, well, I'll tell you what. One of these days it'll come to you. And the day that I quit right here is kind of where I started. I asked him, the yellow went on, it was right before qualifying. We'd run a little over 225. And I said, who hit the wall again? And they said, our team car. I said, what? They said, yeah. And I got to thinking right then, I started here. I had great years here. There was no way I could own cars and run against my own cars. And, you know, so I just went in, and the crew all said, what? How's everything? I said, everything's beautiful. I said, but you got to get another driver. They said, what do you mean? I said, I've quit. And, you know, it was hard to quit, but I just felt like I started here, so I quit here, and that was it. And I haven't sat back in them.
Questions? AJ, I got a question for you. The summer night, Indiana State Fairgrounds, one evening in the 1980s, the pace car takes off, and I'm standing next to somebody and said, I can't believe how fast that pace car is going. And all of a sudden it's sideways through the turn, the whole 9 yards. And you got General Chuck Yeager as your passenger.
Right.
And you got out of the car. Now I just need to know, are we going to see a reprise of that kind of performance as a pace car driver?
You never know what I'll do. I'll tell you one thing about Chuck Yeager. You know, we got to be pretty good friends. And he grabbed the dashboard. I said, what the hell are you doing? He said, it's front wheel drive. I said, don't worry about it. And he says, I'll get you an airplane someday. I said, no, you won't get me in no airplane, because I know I thrilled him a little bit, and I think at the same time he would probably scare the hell out of myself if I was in an airplane with him. But and he's the type of guy that I think he'd hurt himself just to make you holler uncle, and I wouldn't give him that shot.